There are stories that families pass down like cherished heirlooms, polished and perfect, told over holiday dinners. And then there are the other stories, the ones that hide in the shadows, whispered in hallways, buried under decades of silence because they are too painful to excavate. Mine is one of those. My name is Judith, and I am 78 years old. I live in a quiet, small apartment in a town that's grown bigger than I ever thought it would. My days are peaceful now, measured by the sunlight that moves across my living room floor and the geraniums I keep on the windowsill. This quiet is a gift, one I earned. But it was not always this way. I was born in the late 1940s into an America that was trying to catch its breath after the war. My parents were simple people. My father was a mechanic, a man whose hands always smelled of grease and iron, a man who could fix anything with an engine, but was lost when it came to words. My mother was a seamstress, making clothes for the wealthier ladies in town, her fingers always busy, a thimble perpetually on her finger. We were poor, like so many people back then, but we had what we needed. There was always food on the table, even if it was simple, and there was a warmth in our little house that had nothing to do with the furnace. I was only 6 years old when my mother died. Pneumonia. It was a brutal winter, the kind that freezes the inside of the windows. There weren't many medicines available to people like us, not for something that moved so fast. One week she had a cough, and the next, she was gone. Her passing left a hole in our home that sucked all the air out. It left me with a father who was utterly broken. He knew how to build, how to repair, how to make things run. He did not know how to raise a little girl by himself. He worked long hours at the garage, coming home long after dark, too tired to cook, too grieving to talk. I remember sitting alone in the quiet house, learning to be invisible, learning that my own sadness was a burden he couldn't carry. That's when my Aunt Kathleen stepped in. She was my mother's older sister, a woman who seemed to be carved from a different, harder kind of wood than my mother. She came to our house a few weeks after the funeral, wearing a dark, severe suit and a hat, and looked at the dust on the shelves and the unwashed dishes in the sink with profound disapproval. "She can't stay here, not like this," she said to my father, her voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "It's my duty. She is my blood." My father, lost in his fog of grief, just nodded. I think he was relieved. Aunt Kathleen lived with her husband, my Uncle Kenneth, in a large, imposing house in the center of town. They had no children of their own, and the arrival of a 6-year-old girl was, I now realize, a complete disruption to their ordered lives. I remember being terrified that first night. Everything was new and strange. Their house was dark, full of heavy furniture that was always polished, and floors so clean you could see your reflection. It was silent, a heavy, suffocating kind of silence that was nothing like the warm, busy quiet of my own home. I missed my mother so desperately it felt like a physical ache in my chest. But Aunt Kathleen had her own way of making me feel, not at home, but owned. "You're my girl now," she would tell me, brushing my hair with firm, precise strokes before bed. My special girl. That specialness, I would learn, was entirely conditional. Over time, I adjusted. I learned the rules of the house. Aunt Kathleen was a woman of rigid routines. She was not cruel, not in the way people think of cruelty, but she was severe. She expected perfection. "A woman's place," she would say, "is to create a sanctuary for her husband." That sanctuary, it seemed, was built on a foundation of fear and bleach. The house had to be perfect at all times. Meals were served at the exact same minute every day. The laundry had to be ironed with military precision. "This is what a woman learns to do, Judith," she'd say, handing me a cloth to polish the silver. "This is the most important knowledge you will ever possess. It is how you show your worth." It's a strange thing, isn't it? How we can learn to call love something that is really just control. I spent my childhood desperate for her approval, which she gave out in tiny, measured doses, only when I had performed my duties perfectly. A small, thin smile was a victory. A simple, "that will do," was the highest praise. Then there was Uncle Kenneth. He was a quiet man, a man of few words who worked at the local bank. He was respected by everyone in town. He would come home at 5:30 on the dot. The sound of his key in the lock was a signal for the whole house to hold its breath. He expected dinner to be on the table when he walked in, and he ate in silence, reading the newspaper. After dinner, he would retreat to his study, and the door would close. His presence was like a shadow that fell over the entire house. Aunt Kathleen, so strong and commanding with me, became a different person around him. She was quiet, watchful, anticipating his every need before he even knew he had it. There were rules for when Uncle Kenneth was home. You did not speak at the dinner table unless spoken to. You did not make noise while he was resting, and you never, ever contradicted him. "Your uncle knows what's best," Aunt Kathleen would remind me, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He is the man of the house." Growing up in that house, I learned very quickly what it meant to be a good girl. It meant you obeyed without question. It meant you put everyone else's needs before your own. It meant you accepted that all the important decisions were made by the adults, specifically by the men. My own thoughts, my own feelings, were things to be folded up and put away like the ironed linens. When I turned 15, Aunt Kathleen began what she called my real education. She taught me how to cook more elaborate meals, how to mend, how to manage a household budget. "One day you will have a home of your own to run," she would say, her hands on her hips, "and you must be ready." She refused to let me continue in school past the required age, even though my teachers said I was bright and should think about college. "And what good will all those books do you?" she'd ask, with a sharp tone that shut down all discussion. "All a girl needs from books is to read her recipes and her Bible. What you need is to learn how to be a good wife." So my world shrank to the four walls of that house. My days were a repeating cycle of cleaning, cooking, and mending, all under Aunt Kathleen's critical eye. When I was 18, she allowed me to take a job as a salesgirl at the local fabric store. It was a small shop, mostly visited by the older ladies in town coming for buttons, ribbons, and patterns. I loved that job. It was the first time I had a small piece of myself that wasn't controlled by my aunt. It gave me a feeling of independence I had never known. And it was there, in that store, that I met Ronald. He came in one afternoon to buy some special buttons for his mother. He was 27, a few years older than me, and worked a respectable job as a clerk for the county. He had a way of looking at you, a confidence that I found both terrifying and thrilling. When he smiled, my heart did a foolish little flip. He started coming into the store regularly, always with some small excuse. A spool of thread, a new pattern. I knew he was coming to see me. One day, he finally worked up the courage to ask me if I'd like to get an ice cream soda with him after my shift. I was terrified. I had to ask Aunt Kathleen for permission. I was sure she would say no. To my shock, not only did she give me permission, she seemed almost pleased. "Ronald?" she said thoughtfully. "Yes, he comes from a good family, a serious man with a stable job. That is just the kind of man you should be seen with." I was so happy that I didn't stop to ask how she knew so much about him. I would only understand years later that she had likely made inquiries about him the very first time I'd mentioned his name. She was vetting him. Our courtship was brief and proper, always under the watchful eye of my aunt. Ronald would come to the house on Sunday afternoons. He always brought a small box of chocolates for Aunt Kathleen and was unfailingly polite. He spoke mostly to Uncle Kenneth, discussing politics or work, while I served coffee and sat silently, just as I had been taught. 6 months after that first ice cream soda, Ronald asked for my hand in marriage. Uncle Kenneth gave his formal consent, but it was me who had to say yes. I remember the moment clearly. Was I in love? Yes. I thought I was. But I was also in love with the idea of him. I was anxious to finally have a home of my own, to be Mrs. Ronald, to be the mistress of my own house. It was, after all, the one and only goal Aunt Kathleen had ever told me was important in a woman's life. I wonder how many women from my generation felt the same way. That getting married wasn't just about love, but about finally starting a life that was supposed to be your own. We were married in the spring of the following year. I was 19 years old. It was a simple ceremony at the local church with only a few guests. My father came, of course. He looked older than his years, worn down by his work and his loneliness. He hugged me tightly at the church steps, his eyes wet with tears. "Your mother would have been so proud of you, Judith," he whispered. Those words filled me with a warmth and a sadness so deep I could hardly breathe. After the ceremony, we all went back to Aunt Kathleen's house for a small reception with cake and punch. It was there, in that house where I had grown up, that the shadow of my future first fell upon me. I remember I was in the kitchen, getting more plates for the cake, when I heard Aunt Kathleen and my new husband Ronald talking in the hallway. I couldn't see their faces, but their voices were clear, carrying through the swinging door. "You remember what I told you," Aunt Kathleen was saying, her voice low and serious. "She's a good girl, Judith is, but she can be sensitive. She sometimes needs to be guided, firmly. Don't let her get too comfortable, Ronald. A wife must always know her place." I froze, my hand on the stack of plates. My blood ran cold. Then I heard Ronald's voice, smooth and confident. "Don't you worry your head about it, Aunt Kathleen. You've done a fine job with her. But she's my wife now, and I know exactly how to manage her." A strange, heavy dread settled in my stomach. There was something in the way they spoke, a shared understanding, a passing of control from one to the other, that terrified me. It felt cold. It felt wrong. But I pushed the feeling down. I forced it away. It was my wedding day. I was happy. I was Mrs. Ronald. I was finally starting my new life, a life away from my aunt and uncle, a life with the man I loved. I smoothed my white dress, picked up the plates, and pushed the kitchen door open with a smile I didn't feel. What, I asked myself, could possibly go wrong? The first few weeks of our marriage were a dream. We lived in a small rental apartment on the other side of town, not far from my aunt and uncle, but far enough that I felt I had my own space. Ronald went to his job at the county office every morning, and I threw myself into my new role as a housewife, just as Aunt Kathleen had trained me to. I cleaned, I polished, I cooked. I found a genuine pleasure in it at first. When Ronald came home in the evening, I always had a hot dinner waiting on the table. We would eat, and he would tell me about his day, the small politics of the office, the people he'd dealt with. After dinner, we'd listen to the radio together, or, on special nights, go for a walk. It was simple, and I thought it was happiness. The change, when it came, was so gradual that I didn't recognize it as a change at all. I thought it was just part of the normal settling in of marriage. It began with small comments about my cooking. "The pot roast is a bit dry tonight, Judith. You've put too much salt in the gravy." At first I was mortified. I had failed in my most important duty. "I'm so sorry, Ronald," I'd say. "I'll do better tomorrow." And I would try. I would spend all afternoon being even more careful, following the recipes to the letter. But the next night, it would be something else. Then he started in on the house. "You missed a spot of dust on the bookshelf. The floors don't look truly clean." These were the exact same criticisms I had heard from Aunt Kathleen my entire life. I was running from one prison right into another, and I hadn't even realized it. I just tried harder. I scrubbed, I polished, I starched his shirts until they were stiff. I tried to be the perfect wife he expected, the perfect woman Aunt Kathleen had raised me to be. But it was like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in it. Nothing I did was ever enough. One afternoon, about 3 months into our marriage, I was ironing. Ronald had an important meeting the next day and wanted his best white shirt. I was rushing, trying to get it done before I had to start dinner. The iron was too hot, and I wasn't paying close enough attention. I scorched the collar. It wasn't a terrible burn, just a small yellowish-brown mark. But my heart stopped. I knew he would be angry. I spent the next hour trying to fix it, scrubbing it with lemon juice, with baking soda, with every home remedy I'd ever heard of. But the mark remained. When Ronald came home, I was trembling. I waited until after dinner, until he was in a good mood, before I told him. "Ronald," I said, my voice barely a whisper, I had an accident. With your shirt, I burned the collar." He went completely still. The good humor vanished from his face, replaced by a coldness that terrified me. "You what?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It was an accident," I stammered, holding up the shirt to show him. "It's not that bad. I can buy you a new one." "What is wrong with you?" he shouted, suddenly on his feet. The force of his voice made me flinch. "That was my best shirt." Before I could even process what was happening, his hand flew out. He struck me across the face, a hard, open-palmed slap that sent me staggering backward. I fell against the wall and slid to the floor, my cheek burning as if it were on fire. I just sat there, paralyzed by shock and pain. Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and shameful. No one had ever hit me before. Not my father. Not even Aunt Kathleen in her worst tempers. "I'm sorry," I sobbed, the words tasting like ash. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." In an instant, his entire demeanor changed. The rage was gone, replaced by a sudden, unnerving calm. He knelt beside me on the floor, his expression soft, concerned. He gently reached out and touched the cheek he had just struck. "Oh, Judith," he said, his voice a caress. "Look what you made me do." My mind couldn't keep up. I made him do this? "I just lose my patience," he whispered, stroking my hair. "I don't want to hurt you, honey. You know that. I love you. But you have to learn. You have to learn to do things right. You understand that, don't you?" I was so confused, so scared, so desperate for the loving man from our first weeks of marriage to come back, that I nodded. "Yes," I whispered. "I understand." That night, I cried silently in the bathroom, running cold water over my stinging cheek so he wouldn't hear me. I looked in the mirror at the angry red mark of his handprint on my skin. My first thought was to call Aunt Kathleen. She was my family. She would know what to do. She would tell me this was wrong, that Ronald had crossed a line. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the shame, or maybe deep down, I remembered her words from my wedding day. She needs to be guided, firmly. What if she told me I deserved it? What if she told me this was what he was supposed to do? I couldn't bear that. So I said nothing. The next evening, Ronald came home from work with a small bouquet of daisies. He apologized profusely. He promised me, with tears in his eyes, that it would never, ever happen again. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He was my husband. This was my life. This was the man I had promised to love and honor for the rest of my life. It was a mistake. It wouldn't happen again. But it wasn't the last time. It was the beginning of a pattern. The abuse became more frequent, but it always followed the same script. I would make some mistake. Dinner would be 5 minutes late. I would forget to buy milk. I wouldn't have his newspaper ready. He would explode. The anger, the yelling, sometimes the slaps or a hard grab that left bruises on my arms. And then, afterward, would come the apologies, the flowers, the promises that he loved me, that he was just under stress, that he would change. And I learned. I learned to be a very good actress. I learned how to hide the marks. A little extra makeup could cover a fading bruise on my cheek, A scarf worn indoors could hide the marks on my neck. I learned to make excuses for not going out when the marks were too fresh. I learned to be perfect, quiet, and small. I learned to walk on eggshells, constantly sensing his moods, doing anything and everything to keep the peace, to prevent the next explosion. Aunt Kathleen still visited me regularly. She would come by once a week for tea to inspect my housekeeping. At first, I was terrified she would see the bruises, that my terrible secret would be exposed. One Tuesday, she came by unannounced. The day before, Ronald had been furious that I'd shrunk one of his woolen socks in the wash. He had grabbed my face, his fingers digging into my jaw, shaking my head as he yelled at me. I had makeup on, but the dark, finger-shaped bruises on my jawline were still visible if you looked too closely. I tried to keep my head down, to serve the tea quickly. But Aunt Kathleen saw everything. She had eyes like a hawk. She waited until I sat down, and then she stared at me, her teacup poised in midair. "What is that on your face, Judith?" she asked, her voice flat. My blood ran cold. "What? Oh, nothing. I fell," I stammered, the lie feeling clumsy and stupid. I slipped in the kitchen and hit my jaw on the edge of the counter. I waited for the gasp, for the concern, for the anger on my behalf. None of it came. Instead, she just looked at me with a strange, calculating expression. It wasn't pity. It was almost disappointment. "Did Ronald see you fall?" she asked. "Yes," I whispered, confused by her reaction. He was right there when it happened." She nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she already suspected. "I see." She took a sip of her tea. "Well, Judith, you must learn to be more careful. Sometimes a fall is a good way to learn a lesson about paying attention. I hope this accident has taught you to watch your step." Her words hit me harder than Ronald's slap, taught me to watch my step. She knew, she had to know, and she was blaming me. I was so stunned, I couldn't speak. I just sat there as she calmly finished her tea and talked about the weather. That evening, she stayed for dinner. When Ronald came home, she greeted him with unusual warmth, as if they shared a secret. "Ronald," she said, as I served the plates, my hands trembling. "I must say, Judith is learning. She's becoming a fine wife." Ronald glanced at me, then back at her, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "We're working on it, Aunt Kathleen," he replied, his voice smooth. "She's a little slow, but she'll get there. Day by day." Aunt Kathleen nodded, pleased. "Good, that's good to hear." That was the moment I understood. The conversation I'd overheard on my wedding day hadn't been a warning. It had been an instruction. I know exactly how to manage her. My aunt didn't just know about the abuse, she approved of it. She saw it as a necessary part of my education, the same way Uncle Kenneth had no doubt educated her. I wasn't just trapped by my husband. I was trapped by the woman who had raised me. They were in this together. That realization, that cold, hard certainty, was the moment I truly understood what it meant to be alone. There was no one to call. There was nowhere to run. Aunt Kathleen's visits became more frequent after that. She started coming by more often when she knew Ronald would be home. It was like they were a team. They had developed a partnership in my training, and it excluded me completely. I would hear them talking in low voices in the kitchen while I was setting the table, and Aunt Kathleen's comments, which I once thought were just her usual criticisms, now had a sinister edge. She wasn't just critiquing me, she was reporting my failures to him. "Ronald, did you see the way she folded your shirts? The creases aren't sharp enough." She left a ring of dust on the coffee table. A man who works as hard as you shouldn't have to come home to a dirty house. "The gravy is lumpy tonight, Judith," she would say at the table. "You really must do better for your husband." Each criticism was a signal. Each one was a prelude to a punishment that would come later, after she had left, or sometimes even while she was still there. Ronald seemed to enjoy it. He would sit back, a king on his throne, while his aunt listed my failings. And Aunt Kathleen would watch, her face severe and righteous, as he corrected me. "It's for your own good, Judith," she told me one afternoon, after Ronald had yelled at me for 10 minutes because the curtains weren't hung perfectly straight. "It's how I learned my place. It's how I became a good wife. And it's how you will, too." I stopped feeling. I became a ghost in my own home. I learned to anticipate their every need, to read every micro-expression. A certain tightening of Ronald's jaw, the way Aunt Kathleen would press her lips together. I became an expert in avoiding pain. I tried to be perfect. I tried to give them nothing, absolutely nothing, to complain about. But it didn't matter. If there was no genuine mistake to be found, they would invent one. The game wasn't about my perfection. It was about their control. About a year into our marriage, Ronald came home early. I hadn't been feeling well all day. A pounding headache had forced me to lie down on the sofa for just a few minutes. I had drifted off to sleep. I hadn't even started dinner yet. The sound of the key in the lock jolted me awake. I sat up, disoriented, just as he walked into the living room. He saw me on the sofa. He saw the empty, cold kitchen. "Where is my dinner?" he bellowed, his face turning a dark red. "I'm sorry," I gasped, scrambling to my feet. "I wasn't feeling well. I just lay down for a second. I was just about to start." I didn't even get to finish the sentence. His fist hit me in the stomach, hard. The air rushed out of my lungs in a painful whoosh, and I doubled over, gagging. I crumpled to the floor, trying to catch my breath. "You useless, lazy thing!" he was screaming, kicking me in the legs and back as I lay curled in a ball. "This is what I get for working all day? I come home and my wife is sleeping in the middle of the day?" I was trying to protect my head with my arms, sobbing, when I heard the front door open again. It was Aunt Kathleen. She had a key to our apartment. "What is all this noise?" she demanded, walking into the living room. She stopped dead when she saw the scene. Me, huddled on the floor. Ronald, standing over me, his face contorted with rage. This is it, I thought. This is the moment. She can't deny this. She can't twist this. She sees it. She sees what he's doing. She will finally stop him. She will protect me. But she didn't move. She just stood there, her expression unreadable, taking in the scene. Then, slowly, she turned her gaze from me to Ronald. "What did she do?" Aunt Kathleen asked, her voice as cold as ice. "She didn't make dinner," Ronald spat, still breathing hard. "She was asleep on the sofa like a lazy bum." My aunt turned back to me. I was still on the floor, shaking, tears streaming down my face. "Is this true, Judith?" I wasn't feeling well," I choked out. "I had a headache." "Silence!" Aunt Kathleen snapped, with a sharpness that cut right through me. "Excuses are the crutch of an incompetent woman. You have a duty to your husband. You know this. I taught you this." She turned back to Ronald. "My dear boy," she said, her voice softening, "you have every right to be angry. A wife's first duty is to her husband, to anticipate his needs. She knows the rules." Then she walked over to me. She didn't offer a hand. She grabbed me by the upper arm, her fingers digging in, and hauled me to my feet. "Go," she commanded, pushing me toward the kitchen. "Go and make your husband his dinner. Now. And you thank God you have a man who is willing to take the time to teach you how to behave." That night, as I cooked dinner with trembling hands, my body aching from the kicks, I could hear them in the living room. Their voices were low, calm, conspiratorial. I couldn't hear every word, but I caught phrases that drifted into the kitchen. Just like it was with Kenneth. Difficult at first, but they learn. Her father was always too soft on her. The Bible is very clear. The wife must submit. That night, I understood my fate. Aunt Kathleen was not just an observer. She was not just an enabler. She was an active, willing participant in my abuse. She was my teacher, and this was my lesson. Our first wedding anniversary was approaching. It was also the week of a big town celebration, and I decided, in a foolish burst of hope, to make a special dinner. I spent days planning it. I would clean the apartment from top to bottom. I would make Ronald's favorite meal, a standing rib roast. I even used some of the grocery money I'd managed to hide away to buy a bottle of good wine. Maybe, I thought, if I could create one perfect evening, if I could just show him how good I could be, he would remember the man he used to be. He would remember the woman he married. I was only 20 years old, but I felt ancient. My eyes, when I looked in the mirror, were the eyes of a stranger, haunted, tired, and old. They were eyes that had seen too much and cried too much. I asked myself, as I set the table with the good plates we'd gotten as a wedding gift, if this was it. Was this my life, forever? It was in that moment a new cold feeling bloomed in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was resolve. I couldn't live this way. I wouldn't. I didn't know how, but I knew I had to find a way out. I had to save myself. That evening, Ronald came home, and for a moment it seemed my plan was working. He saw the table, the candles, the roast. He seemed surprised, even pleased. "Well, look at this," he said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "What's all this for?" "It's our anniversary soon," I said softly. We ate dinner. He talked about his work. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't criticize the food. We drank the wine. I felt a tiny, fragile seed of hope begin to grow. Maybe he was changing. Maybe we could be happy. Then, as I was clearing the plates, he dropped the news. "By the way," he said, "I invited your aunt to stay with us for a while. There's some major work being done on their roof, and it's going to take a few weeks. They'll be here tomorrow." The plate in my hand slipped, clattering against the others. "Aunt Kathleen?" I whispered, the blood draining from my face. "Here? With us?" "And Uncle Kenneth," he confirmed, watching my reaction closely. "Is there a problem with that?" I dropped my gaze, hiding the panic that was rising in my throat like bile. "No, no problem at all. When are they arriving?" "Tomorrow afternoon." He leaned across the table, his good mood gone, replaced by the familiar threatening tone. "And Judith, I want this house to be perfect. I want her to see what a good job I've done with you. Do you understand me? Perfect." That night, I didn't sleep. Aunt Kathleen, in my home. Every day, every minute. It meant I would never have a moment of peace. I would be under constant watch, constant judgment. It meant more criticism, more failures, more punishments. It was my worst nightmare come to life. But as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, another thought came to me. Her being here also meant an opportunity to watch her, to understand why. Why was she like this? Why did she seem to take pleasure in my suffering? Why did she truly believe that what was happening to me was right and just and necessary? I needed to find the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that truth would be the key to getting me out. Aunt Kathleen and Uncle Kenneth arrived the next afternoon, exactly at 4 o'clock. Ronald had come home from work early to greet them, and he paced the small living room, inspecting my cleaning work for the 10th time. "Remember," he hissed at me, "perfect. I want them to see we have a proper home." Their arrival changed the very air in our small apartment. Our space, which I already found suffocating, became a pressurized prison cell. Aunt Kathleen brought with her not just 2 large suitcases, but her entire system of rigid rules, her crushing expectations, and her distorted vision of what a family was supposed to be. She took the small second bedroom, the one I had secretly hoped might one day be a nursery. Within an hour, it was no longer a guest room. It was her command center. From the very first morning, she established a new, grueling routine. She was up at dawn, and she expected me to be up with her. A wife is up before her husband, Judith, always, to prepare his way. Together, we made Ronald's breakfast. Or rather, I made it, and she supervised, correcting my every move. The coffee is too weak. A man needs strong coffee to face the world. You're cutting the toast too thick. He's not a lumberjack. His eggs must be served the moment they are cooked. A cold egg is an insult. After Ronald and Uncle Kenneth left for work, Kenneth seeming to just evaporate from the house in silence, my real workday began. Every task was now done under her watch, and everything I did was wrong. "You must iron the shirts in this order, Judith," she'd say, holding up one of Ronald's shirts I had just finished. "Cuffs first, then the collar, then the sleeves, then the body. That is how your mother learned, how I learned, and how you will learn." She would undo my work and make me start again. "The table is set all wrong. The fork tines must be perfectly aligned with the knife blade. The napkin is folded into a rectangle, not a triangle. Details, Judith. A good home is built on details." The first few weeks were exhausting. I was living in a state of constant, high-alert anxiety. I was a child again, desperately trying to earn a word of praise, and at the same time, I was a prisoner trying to avoid a beating. It was a terrible, confusing existence. Uncle Kenneth's presence was a different kind of terror. He was, as he had always been, a man of profound silence. He would sit in the living room's best chair, reading his newspaper, and the entire apartment would revolve around his quiet. Ronald, who was so loud and commanding with me, changed when his uncle was in the room. He became rigid, formal, almost like a schoolboy trying to impress a stern headmaster. This new dynamic made Ronald even more volatile with me. He was desperate to prove to his uncle that he was a real man, that he was the undisputed master of his home. Any tiny mistake I made, especially in front of Kenneth, was seen as a personal humiliation to Ronald, an undermining of his authority. And I knew, with sickening certainty, that I would pay for it later, in the privacy of our bedroom. I was trapped. I had nowhere to go, no one to talk to. My father lived in another town, and even if he were closer, what could I say? He was a man of that same generation. He would probably tell me to be a better wife. My old friends from the fabric store had drifted away. Ronald didn't like me gossiping with other women, and I had become too ashamed of my life to want to see them anyway. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, I was washing the dishes. Ronald and Kenneth were in the living room, listening to a baseball game on the radio, the volume low. Aunt Kathleen was in the kitchen with me, supervising my dishwashing. "You are scrubbing too hard," she said, her voice sharp. "You will wear out the pattern on the plates." I stopped, my hands stinging from the hot water, and just let the plate rest in the sink. "Aunt Kathleen," I whispered, so low the men couldn't hear. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" she asked, feigning ignorance. "Teaching you." "No," I said, a sudden reckless bravery rising in me. You're helping him. You're telling him every little thing I do wrong, and you know what he does. You know he educates you." She finished the sentence for me, her voice cold and hard. "He is your husband. It is his right and his duty to correct you when you fail, just as it was Kenneth's right to correct me." My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. This was the opening I had been looking for. "Uncle Kenneth?" I whispered. "What do you mean?" Aunt Kathleen's expression didn't change, but her eyes seemed to look past me at a memory. "I was a headstrong girl once, much like you. I had my own ideas. Kenneth was very patient, but he had to be firm. It was difficult at first, but I learned. I learned that his way was the right way. I learned that submission is not a weakness, Judith. It is a woman's strength. It is how we keep the peace. It is how we build a home." A chill ran down my spine. He had to be firm. Those were the same words she had used with Ronald at my wedding. I suddenly pictured a young Aunt Kathleen, just as I was, being educated by the silent, imposing man in the next room. My anger toward her was suddenly complicated by a feeling I didn't want to have. Pity. She was me. She was just older. But that pity evaporated when I realized what she was doing. She wasn't just a victim. She was a collaborator. She was perpetuating the very system that had broken her. She was feeding me to the same wolves that had devoured her. And now, she continued, pulling me from my thoughts, you are a respected woman, a devoted wife. That is what I want for you, Judith. I want you to be like me. I will never be like you, I screamed in my head. But my mouth just said, yes, Aunt Kathleen. A few weeks later, my world tilted again. I began to feel sick. Every morning, I would wake up with a wave of nausea so powerful I would have to run to the bathroom and vomit, muffling the sound with a towel so I wouldn't wake Ronald. I tried to hide it. I thought it was just the stress or something I ate. But after a week of this, I couldn't hide it any longer. One morning, I was so sick I couldn't get out of the bathroom. Aunt Kathleen, already dressed and in her apron, heard me. She came and stood in the doorway, watching me as I knelt on the cold tile floor. "What's this?" she asked, not with concern, but with suspicion. "I don't know," I whispered, wiping my mouth. "I think I'm just sick." She watched me for a long, silent moment. Her eyes narrowed, taking in my pale face, my shaky hands. Then, a slow, strange smile spread across her face. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile of grim satisfaction. "When was your last monthly?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. With the stress of their arrival, I hadn't been paying attention. But now that I thought about it, it had been weeks, maybe 6. I don't know," I stammered. "A month, maybe more." "You're pregnant," she declared. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. "I know that sickness. It's the same kind I had." "You had?" I asked, confused. "But you don't have any children." A shadow, as fast as a bird's wing, passed over her face. It was there and gone in an instant, but I saw it. I saw the flash of a deep, ancient pain. "No," she said, her voice suddenly flat and empty. "I do not. But I was pregnant. 3 times. She said nothing more. She didn't explain what happened to those babies. And I, looking at her closed-off, stony expression, did not dare to ask. The micro-loop of that mystery hung in the air between us, dark and heavy. What had happened to her children? "Well," she said, her brisk tone returning as she straightened her apron, "we must tell Ronald immediately. He will be thrilled. A child is what completes a family. It gives a man a legacy." I just sat there on the bathroom floor, the cold seeping into my nightgown, my mind reeling. A baby. I was going to have a baby. In any other life, this would have been the most joyous news in the world. But in this house, with this husband, with her here, watching, judging, educating, the idea of bringing a child into this atmosphere of fear and violence filled me with a terror so profound it eclipsed the morning sickness. That evening, when Ronald and Kenneth came home, Aunt Kathleen didn't wait. She announced it to them as if it were her own triumph. "Ronald," she said, her voice brimming with a strange excitement, "I have wonderful news for you. Judith is with child. You are going to be a father." There was a moment of stunned silence. I stood by the kitchen door, my hands clenched at my sides, watching him. Ronald's face broke into a wide, proud grin. "Really?" he boomed, looking at me. "Are you sure?" "I am positive," Aunt Kathleen said. "She has all the signs, the morning sickness, the delay. She is at least a month along." "A son," Ronald said, his eyes gleaming. He walked over to me and for the first time in months hugged me. It was a hard, possessive hug that didn't feel like affection. It felt like ownership. "A son, an heir." He kissed my forehead. "I'm so happy, Judith," he said. I forced a smile. "Me too," I lied. I wasn't happy. I was terrified, but I couldn't tell him that. "We must celebrate," he declared. "Kenneth, let's open that bottle of whiskey you brought." "Judith can't drink," Aunt Kathleen intervened immediately. "It's not good for the child." "You're right, as always," Ronald conceded. "Then we'll drink to her, to my son." That night, for the first time in a long time, dinner was peaceful. Ronald was in a buoyant mood, talking about the future, about how he would teach his son to be a real man, how he'd take him hunting and fishing. "If it's a boy, of course," he said, looking at me. "If it's a girl, well, you and Aunt Kathleen will know how to train her, won't you?" Aunt Kathleen nodded, a look of grim understanding passing between them. "Oh, yes. We'll teach her everything a good woman needs to know." I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with the nausea, the idea of having a daughter, a little girl, and handing her over to these two to be trained, to be broken just as I had been. No. In that moment, as they raised their glasses to my unborn child, my resolve hardened from a vague wish into a diamond-hard necessity. I had to get out. It wasn't just about me anymore. I had to save my baby. The pregnancy, I had foolishly hoped, might soften Ronald. It did the opposite. While he was careful not to hit me in the stomach, the abuse in other ways escalated. He was angrier, more impatient. My pregnancy, with its sickness and fatigue, made me clumsy. I was slower. I made more mistakes. And Aunt Kathleen was always there to point them out. "The baby is making her lazy, Ronald. She is using the child as an excuse to avoid her duties." The psychological torment was constant. And Ronald, emboldened by Uncle Kenneth's presence and his new status as a future father, became even more of a tyrant. The breaking point came one Sunday. Uncle Kenneth was, of course, there for the big midday meal. I had been on my feet all morning, cooking a large roast. I was 5 months pregnant. My sickness had faded, but I was replaced by a constant, dull ache in my back. I was exhausted. I was serving the coffee after the meal, my hands trembling from the weight of the tray. As I went to hand a cup to Uncle Kenneth, I stumbled, just a small misstep. The cup tilted, and hot coffee splashed onto the saucer and then onto the floor, just missing his shoe. A terrible, heavy silence fell over the room. I froze, mortified. "I'm so sorry, Uncle Kenneth." Uncle Kenneth didn't even look at me. He slowly wiped a single drop of coffee from his trousers with a napkin. Then he turned his cold, quiet gaze to Ronald. "I see your wife is clumsy," he said, his voice flat. "It's an embarrassment. I hope you are attending to her education, Ronald. A man who cannot control his own wife. Well, he is not much of a man, is he?" I saw the color drain from Ronald's face, replaced by a flush of dark, humiliated rage. He had been shamed in front of the one man whose respect he craved. I knew in that instant that I was going to pay for that spilled cup of coffee. The rest of the afternoon was agony. I cleaned up the mess in silence, feeling the weight of Ronald's fury burning into my back. I could barely breathe. That night, after Aunt Kathleen and Uncle Kenneth had retired to their room, Ronald exploded. He grabbed me by the hair in the kitchen and slammed me against the wall. The back of my head hit the plaster with a sickening thud. "You made me look like a fool," he roared, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and sour. "You humiliated me in front of my uncle. I told you to be perfect." "It was an accident," I sobbed, my hands flying up to protect my belly. "I'm sorry, Ronald. I didn't mean to." "Your excuses are worthless," he shouted, raising his fist. I cringed, bracing for the blow. But before it could land, a voice cut through the air. "Ronald!" It was Aunt Kathleen. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, tying the belt of her nightrobe. "Remember the child," she said, her voice calm and commanding. Ronald froze, his fist still in the air. He was breathing like a bull, his whole body shaking with rage. But her words, her presence, seemed to break the spell. Slowly, agonizingly, he lowered his hand. He looked from her to me, his eyes full of a terrifying promise. "You're right," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "The baby." He let go of my hair, shoving me away from him. I stumbled, catching myself on the counter. "But this isn't over, Judith," he snarled, pointing a finger at my face. "You mark my words. You will pay for every single one of your failures. After that baby is born, your real education begins." He stormed out of the kitchen and slammed the bedroom door. I was left alone, shaking, my head throbbing, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. Aunt Kathleen was still standing in the doorway. For a second, I thought I saw something in her face. Was it concern? She walked over and helped me to a chair. She even poured me a glass of water. "Are you all right?" she asked, her gaze fixed on my stomach. "The baby is all right?" "I think so," I whispered, my hand protectively on my belly. He didn't hit me there." "Good," she said, nodding. Then she looked me straight in the eye, her expression hardening again. "Judith, you must understand. Ronald is a good man. He is a good husband. He is providing you with a home, a child. He is teaching you how to be a proper wife. It is for your own good." I stared at her, my last shred of hope crumbling to dust. After what she had just seen, after that violence, she was still defending him. "For my own good?" I whispered, my voice shaking with a new kind of rage. "He was going to hit me. He hurts me, Aunt Kathleen. He treats me like an animal. How is that for my good?" "It is how the world works," she insisted, her voice dropping. "The man is the head of the house. The woman is the heart. The head must rule. It is the natural order of things. It is written in the Bible." "The Bible does not say a husband should beat his wife," I shot back, emboldened by my desperation. Aunt Kathleen actually smiled. It was the saddest, most tired smile I had ever seen. "The Bible says the wife must submit to her husband, as the church submits to Christ, and sometimes to teach submission, a firm hand is required. Think of how God himself had to punish his children when they disobeyed." "Auntie," I said, my voice breaking, "you and Uncle Kenneth, is this how it was? Is this what he did to you?" She looked down at her hands, folded neatly in her lap. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Kenneth is a good man," she said finally, her voice flat. "He taught me what I needed to know. It was difficult at first. I was stubborn. But I learned. I learned to be the wife he required." "Did he hit you?" I whispered. Did he hurt you? Is that what happened to your babies?" Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with a cold fire that silenced me. "He educated me," she said, her voice sharp and final. "Just as Ronald is educating you. And one day, Judith, you will thank him for it. Just as I learned to thank Kenneth." She stood up, smoothed her robe, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone at the table, the glass of water untouched. I finally understood. She wasn't just a collaborator. She was a true believer. She had been so thoroughly broken, so completely educated, that she couldn't see any other way to live. She didn't just accept her abuse, she was grateful for it. And she truly, genuinely believed she was helping me by forcing me down the same path. I would get no help from her. I would get no help from anyone. I sat there in the dark kitchen for hours. I was not just a prisoner. I was a prisoner whose jailer believed she was setting me free. I was completely, terrifyingly on my own. And I had another life inside me, a life that was depending on me to break the chain. That night, after I was sure everyone was asleep, I tiptoed back into the kitchen. I took the housekeeping envelope, where Ronald kept the money for the week's groceries. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open the clasp. I took out a single-dollar bill. I folded it again and again until it was a tiny, tight square. I went into the bathroom, and in the back of the medicine cabinet, behind an old bottle of aspirin, I pushed the dollar bill into a crack in the wall. It was almost nothing. It was a single, hopeless dollar. But it was a start. It was the first thing I had ever done that was just for me. It was my first secret, and it was the first brick in my escape. As my pregnancy advanced, my belly grew, and so did my determination. I was 6 months along, then 7. My small secret stash of money in the bathroom wall grew, $1 at a time, sometimes just a handful of change. It was a slow, painful process. It represented more than just money. It represented every meal I'd skipped, every small lie I'd told about the grocery prices. It was my hope chest, a tiny, pathetic collection of coins and folded bills that I prayed would one day buy me a bus ticket to anywhere else. Ronald, true to his word, had stopped hitting me, but the education had not stopped. It had simply changed its form, becoming a more insidious psychological torment. He seemed to have taken Aunt Kathleen's lesson about the child to heart. He wouldn't risk harming his heir, but he found other ways to punish me. He would make me stand for hours while he and his uncle sat and ate. "You're getting too comfortable, Judith. It's not good for you to be sitting all the time." He would wake me in the middle of the night, demanding I get up and polish his shoes for work. "A wife's duty never sleeps," he'd say, flicking on the light. "And you've been lazy. You need the extra practice." Aunt Kathleen, of course, encouraged it all. She had become obsessed with the baby and with my behavior as an expectant mother. "You must not be stressed, Judith," she would say, in the same breath she used to criticize the way I'd folded the towels. "Stress is bad for the child." "You must eat healthy foods," she would declare, while monitoring my plate to ensure I wasn't taking too large a portion. "We don't want a fat, greedy baby." My life was a walking contradiction, a minefield of impossible expectations. I was to be a perfect, placid vessel for this child, while simultaneously enduring a constant barrage of criticism and cruelty designed to break my spirit. The baby, always the baby. It was never about me. Never, "How are you feeling, Judith?" It was, "Is the child healthy?" I was no longer a person. I was a container. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen trying to get a head start on dinner. Ronald was due home in an hour, and Uncle Kenneth was already in the living room, rustling his newspaper, a sound I had come to despise. Aunt Kathleen was out, having gone to the market. It was a rare, precious moment of being in a room by myself. I allowed myself to pause, just for a second. I leaned against the counter and placed both hands on my swollen belly, feeling the strong, definite kick of the life inside me. A little flutter. It was the only thing in my world that felt real, that felt like mine. In that moment of quiet, a wave of such profound love and fierce protectiveness washed over me that it took my breath away. "I will get you out of here," I whispered to my stomach. "I promise you. I will not let them do to you what they did to me." I don't know how long I stood there, but suddenly the front door opened. I hadn't even heard the key. Ronald was home, early. I jumped, startled, and my hand knocked a glass off the counter. It shattered on the linoleum floor with a sound that felt as loud as a gunshot. He was in the kitchen doorway in a second, his face dark. He saw me. He saw the broken glass, and he saw the pot on the stove, still full of cold, uncooked vegetables. Dinner was not ready. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. I'm sorry," I stammered, bending down to try and pick up the pieces, my large belly making it awkward. "You're home early. I was just starting." "You were just starting?" he repeated, his voice rising. I work all day. I break my back for this family, and you're in here, dreaming, breaking things, wasting my money? No, I was still on my knees, trying to gather the shards of glass. I was just feeling the baby kick. That was the wrong thing to say. The baby, he spat, as if the word were poison. You use that child as an excuse for everything. You're lazy, Judith. You're incompetent. Aunt Kathleen is right. You are a complete and total failure as a wife. He was advancing on me. I was still on the floor, trapped between the counter and him. I scrambled backward, my hands protecting my belly. Please, Ronald, I begged. Please don't. The baby. You always hide behind that baby, he roared. He kicked the cupboard door next to my head, the wood splitting with a loud crack. You think that's going to protect you forever? It won't. He grabbed me by my upper arms and hauled me to my feet. He was shaking me, his face contorted with rage. You are useless, useless. My uncle is right. I'm not a man. I'm a joke, because I can't even get any respect in my own home. He shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, my feet tangling in the mess of broken glass. I fell, not just to my knees, but hard, onto my side, my body twisting. I cried out as a sharp, agonizing pain shot through my abdomen. It was a pain I had never felt before, a deep, tearing cramp. I lay on the kitchen floor, gasping. Get up, Ronald snarled. Stop faking it. Get up and clean this mess. I can't, I whimpered. The pain was blinding, coming in waves. Ronald, something's wrong. Something is really wrong. The baby. I looked down. A dark, wet stain was spreading on the front of my dress. And it wasn't just water from the spilled glass. It was blood. The sight of it, the bright, terrible red against my maternity dress, made me scream. It was a sound I didn't recognize, a raw, animal sound of pure terror. I'm bleeding, I shrieked. Ronald, help me! I'm losing the baby! That finally broke through his rage. The color drained from his face. He stared at the blood, his eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Oh God, he whispered. Oh God, no. The events of the next hour are a blur. I remember Uncle Kenneth appearing in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of pale disapproval. I remember Ronald carrying me, running down the apartment stairs. I remember the frantic, jolting ride in the car, every bump sending a fresh wave of agony through me. I remember the bright, sterile lights of the hospital emergency room. Voices, sharp and urgent, floating above me. 7 months pregnant. Bleeding. Severe abdominal trauma. BP is dropping. Did she fall? I heard Ronald's voice, shaking but firm, lying. Yes, she fell. She slipped in the kitchen. She's so clumsy, always has been. A nurse, her face kind but firm, leaned close to me. Ma'am, did you fall? Or did someone push you? I looked past her and saw Ronald's face, pale and terrified. He was watching me, warning me. I was so scared of him. Scared for my baby. If I told the truth, what would he do? Would he let the baby die? Would he take me away from the only people who could help? I fell, I whispered. I'm clumsy. It was an accident. The nurse's eyes held mine for a moment longer. I could see she didn't believe me, but she didn't have time to argue. We're losing her, a doctor shouted. She needs an emergency C-section. Now, get her to an OR. The last thing I remember before the fog of anesthesia took me was the sound of my own weak voice, begging, Please, save my baby. Please, save my baby. When I woke up, the world was fuzzy and gray. I was in a hospital bed. I felt weak, and my entire midsection was on fire, a deep, searing pain. A nurse was there, adjusting a bag on a pole next to my bed. She was a woman in her 40s, with a no-nonsense set to her mouth but kind eyes. My first thought, my only thought, was the baby. "My baby?" I whispered, my throat raw. "Is my baby?" I couldn't finish the sentence. The nurse's face softened. "Your baby is here," she said, her voice gentle. "You have a daughter. She's very, very small, but she's a fighter. She's in the neonatal unit, in an incubator. But she's alive, honey. You have a little girl." A daughter. I had a daughter. A wave of relief so profound it felt like pain washed over me. She was alive. I hadn't failed her. Not completely. "My husband?" I asked, the familiar dread returning. "He's in the waiting room, with your aunt. They've been here all night." She finished adjusting my drip. "My name is Beverly," she said. "I'll be looking after you." She busied herself, taking my pulse, checking the bandage on my stomach. She was all business, but I felt a strange sense of safety with her. How am I?" I asked. "You had a rough time," she said, not sugarcoating it. "You lost a lot of blood. The doctor had to do an emergency cesarean, but you're going to be all right. You're young, you're strong, you just need to rest." She paused, and her professional mask slipped. She looked at me, really looked at me, with an expression of deep sadness. "You're covered in bruises, Judith," she said quietly. "Old ones, fading, and new ones, on your arms, on your back. Those didn't come from a fall." I tensed, the old familiar shame washing over me. I told you." "I know what you told the doctor," she interrupted, her voice still low and kind. "And I know what I see. I've been a nurse for 20 years. I know what a kitchen fall looks like, and I know what a man's hands look like." I started to cry. Silent, hot tears that I couldn't stop, rolling down my temples and into my hair. I wasn't just crying for the pain or the fear. I was crying because someone had finally said it. Someone had seen the truth and named it. "It's all right," she said, pulling up a chair and sitting beside the bed. "You don't have to talk about it. Not now. You just need to rest. But I want you to know something. You're safe here. In this hospital, he cannot touch you, and we are going to help you." I didn't know what she meant. I didn't know what help she could possibly offer. But for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't alone. Later that day, they let Ronald and Aunt Kathleen in to see me. It was a terrible, surreal performance. Ronald came in holding a bouquet of flowers, his face a perfect mask of the worried, loving husband. He kissed my forehead, his lips cold. "Oh, Judith," he said, his voice loud enough for the nurses to hear. "You gave us such a scare, tripping like that. You have to be more careful." Aunt Kathleen stood behind him, her arms crossed, her face grim. "A girl," she said, her first word one of disappointment. "Well, we had hoped for a boy, but a girl can be useful. She'll be a help to you in the house once she's old enough to be trained." I just stared at them. They were strangers, monsters, playing dress-up as my family. "The baby is very sick," I said, my voice weak but cold, "because of my fall." "Nonsense," Aunt Kathleen snapped. "Babies are born early all the time. She'll be fine. She just needs discipline. And you, Judith, need to get well. This hospital is costing Ronald a fortune. You need to get home, where you belong." "She's not going anywhere until the doctor says so," Beverly's voice cut through the air. She had entered the room, and her presence was like a shield. "Mrs. Judith needs to rest. Visiting hours are over." Ronald's face tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew how to play the part. "Of course, nurse. We just wanted to see our girl. We'll be back tomorrow." He and Aunt Kathleen left, and I was alone with Beverly. They're not good people," I whispered, the admission tearing out of me. "I know," Beverly said, straightening my pillows. "Now, listen to me. You have a few days here, maybe a week, while you recover. Your baby girl will be in the neonatal unit for much longer, maybe a month, maybe 2. She's very small. She needs to be safe, and so do you." "But where can I go?" I asked, the old panic rising. "He'll never let me go, and even if I did, I have no money. I have almost nothing." "One thing at a time," Beverly said, her voice firm. "First, we get you strong. Second, I'm going to make a call. There's a woman I know. Her name is Rosemary. She's a social worker with the hospital. She helps women in situations like yours." A social worker. The word sounded official and frightening. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Beverly said, seeing the fear in my face. Just talk to her. See what she has to say." "Will you do that? For your daughter?" I thought of my little girl, fighting for her life in a plastic box. I thought of Aunt Kathleen's words. "Once she's old enough to be trained." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "Yes, I'll talk to her." "Good." Beverly smiled. "Now, I'm going to see if I can get you a wheelchair. I think it's time you went and met your daughter." Later that evening, Beverly wheeled me down the quiet, sterile hallway to the neonatal unit. The room was dark, filled with the soft, rhythmic beeping of monitors. A nurse led me to a small incubator in the corner. And there she was. She was the tiniest human being I had ever seen. She was so small, her skin looked almost transparent. She was hooked up to a tangle of wires and tubes, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath from the machine. "She's so little," I whispered, my hand flat against the warm plastic. "She's a fighter," the nurse said softly. "She weighs just 3 pounds, but all her vitals are strong. She's feisty." I looked at her, this tiny, perfect creature, and my heart cracked open. All the fear, all the pain of the last 2 years, it all melted away. And all that was left was a love so fierce and so powerful, it felt like it could burn down the world. "Hi, little one," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm your mommy. I'm right here." I stayed there for an hour, just watching her breathe, my fingers pressed to the plastic, trying to will my strength into her. I made her a promise, in that dark, quiet room. "I will not let them have you," I vowed. "I will die before I let them turn you into me." When Beverly came to wheel me back to my room, my resolve was no longer just a cold feeling in my chest. It was a raging fire. "I'm ready," I told her, my voice clear. "I'll talk to the social worker. I'll do whatever it takes. I am not going back to that apartment, and he is not getting his hands on my daughter." Beverly looked at me, a long, appraising look. "I knew you were a fighter too," she said. She got me settled back in bed. She was about to leave for the night, but she paused at the door. "Judith," she said, her voice hesitant, "there's something else. It's strange." "What is it?" "When you told me your aunt's name, Kathleen, and your uncle's name, Kenneth." It rang a bell. A story I heard from one of the older nurses who's been here for 30 years, about a woman with that name, from your part of town. My blood went cold. What story?" I shouldn't," she said, wrestling with herself. "It's a breach of privacy, but—" "Beverly, please," I begged. "You don't understand. She's part of it. She wants him to hurt me. She says it's for my own good. Please, if you know something." Beverly made her decision. "I went down to the hospital archives," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I looked up the old admission records from nearly 30 years ago. I found her." "And?" I whispered, hardly daring to breathe. "She was a patient here, Judith, 3 times, over a period of 5 years. All 3 times she was admitted for complications of pregnancy. All 3 times she lost the baby." My hand flew to my mouth. This was it, the micro-loop, the 3 pregnancies she'd mentioned. "But that's not all," Beverly said, her eyes dark. "I found the admission photos, the ones they used to take for the file." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope. I made copies, she said. I'm probably going to lose my job for this, but I think you need to see them. She handed me the envelope. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open it. Inside were 3 grainy black and white photographs. They were of a young woman lying in a hospital bed. Her face was swollen, her lips split. A dark, ugly bruise covered her entire left cheek and eye. It took me a second to recognize her. It was Aunt Kathleen, 30 years younger, but her eyes were the same. Haunted, broken, and full of a terrible, familiar fear. "The 3rd admission," Beverly whispered. 6 months pregnant. The chart said she'd fallen down the stairs. She lost a baby boy that night. The report was signed by her husband, Kenneth. I held the grainy photographs in my trembling hand. I stared at the face of the young woman in the hospital bed, her features swollen and bruised, her eyes holding the same haunted, broken terror that I saw in my own reflection every morning. Aunt Kathleen. "She lost 3 babies," I whispered, the words thick in my throat. Kenneth, he beat them out of her." "The chart says accidental fall," Beverly said, her voice filled with a quiet, professional rage. "But the notes from the attending nurse, the one I spoke to, tell a different story. She was terrified of her husband. She begged them not to let him in the room, but in those days, they always let the husband in." She gently took the photos back from me and put them in the envelope. "Rosemary, the social worker, will be here in the morning. She will tell you what your options are. But Judith," she said, looking me straight in the eye, "you cannot go back to that house. You know that, don't you? You won't just be saving yourself. You'll be saving your daughter from her." She nodded toward the photos, toward the ghost of the young Aunt Kathleen. I finally understood. I understood the coldness, the cruelty, the obsession with education and submission. I understood her words. "I want you to be like me." She had been a prisoner for so long that she had not only made peace with her jailer, she had begun to recruit for him. She was passing her sickness on to me, the only way she knew how to make sense of her own suffering. If it happened to me too, then it wasn't a tragedy. It was just the way of the world. "No," I said, a new cold fire hardening my voice. "I will not be like her, and my daughter will not be like me. I'm ready. I'll do whatever Rosemary says." That night, for the first time in my marriage, I didn't have a single nightmare. I slept. The next morning, Beverly introduced me to Rosemary, the hospital social worker. She was a kind, practical woman who carried a worn leather briefcase. She didn't waste time with pity. She sat by my bed and spoke in clear, direct terms. "Judith, Beverly has explained the situation to me, and I've reviewed the notes on your file," she said. "Here is the reality. You are married to him. Legally, your child is his. He has a right to you and to her. Unless we can prove you are in danger." "He'll kill me," I whispered. "If not my body, then my mind, and he will do the same to my daughter." "I believe you," Rosemary said, "which is why we have to move fast. There is a women's shelter, a safe house, not far from here. It's a place where he cannot find you. They can give you a room, food, and legal protection. We can file for an immediate emergency order of protection based on your injuries and the baby's premature birth. But you will have to testify." "And my baby?" I asked, my heart seizing in panic. "I can't leave her." "This is the hardest part," Rosemary said, her face softening. "Your daughter, she needs to stay here. She is very, very small. She needs the incubators, the doctors. She may be here for 6 or 8 weeks. You cannot take her with you to the shelter. Not yet. It's not equipped for a baby this fragile." My world tilted. Leave her? Here? Where he can see her? "We will alert hospital security," Rosemary said firmly. "The emergency order will include her. He will not be allowed to see her or make any decisions for her. She will be safe here, I promise you. Safer than anywhere else right now. You need this time, Judith. You need these few weeks to get yourself set up, to get the legal protection in place, and to find your strength. You have to be strong for when she comes home. I looked at her, and then at Beverly, who was standing at the door. I thought of my tiny, fragile daughter, alone in a plastic box. And I thought of Ronald's face, twisted in rage. "Okay," I said, the word tasting like iron. "Okay, I'll do it. What about my aunt and uncle? They're living with us. They'll know I'm gone." "Leave them to me," I said, a thought forming in my mind. I need to see my aunt. Alone. Can you make that happen?" Beverly and Rosemary exchanged a look. "That's risky, Judith," Rosemary said. "I have to," I insisted. "I have to do this one last thing, please." The next day, I had to see Ronald. It was the hardest performance of my life. I smiled weakly when he came in. I told him the lie that Rosemary had coached me on. "The doctor is worried about my blood pressure," I murmured. "He wants to keep me for a few more days, just for observation." Ronald was impatient, annoyed by the cost, but he accepted it. "Fine, but don't get comfortable. That house is a mess without you. Kathleen is trying, but she's not you." After he left, I waited. An hour later, as I knew she would, Aunt Kathleen came by herself. She brought a small bag with a fresh nightgown. "Ronald is furious," she said, her voice sharp as she entered. "He says you're malingering, lying to the doctors so you can stay here and be lazy." "He's wrong," I said quietly. Beverly, who had been waiting outside, stepped into the room and closed the door. She stood by it, her arms crossed. "What is this?" Aunt Kathleen asked, her eyes narrowing. "Aunt Kathleen," I said, my voice shaking. I reached under my pillow for the envelope Beverly had given me. "I want to ask you about your education." I pulled out the first photograph and held it up, the one of her swollen, bruised face. My aunt went pale. She looked as if I had struck her. She stared at the photo, her hand flying to her mouth, and for the first time, I saw the mask of the severe, righteous matriarch crack and fall away. Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice a strangled gasp. "In this hospital," I said, my voice gaining strength. 30 years ago. You fell down the stairs, didn't you, Auntie, while you were 6 months pregnant?" Aunt Kathleen staggered back and sat heavily in the visitor's chair. She made a small, wounded sound, like an animal. "You lost him, didn't you? A boy. Just like you lost the other two. It wasn't complications, was it? It was Uncle Kenneth. He educated you. He beat those babies out of you." The truth, spoken aloud, hung in the sterile air between us. Aunt Kathleen broke. It was not a gentle weeping. It was a complete and total collapse. She doubled over, her shoulders shaking with dry, rattling sobs that seemed to be torn from a place of ancient, buried grief. He said it was my fault," she choked out, her words broken. "He said I was defiant, that I provoked him, that my bad blood, my wicked thoughts, poisoned them. I believed him. I believed I was a bad wife, a bad mother, that I deserved it. I looked at this broken woman, the woman who had terrorized me, the woman who had handed me over to my abuser, and I felt nothing but a vast, hollow pity." "And you thought you had to do the same to me?" I asked, my voice soft. "You thought you had to teach me how to deserve it too?" "I wanted you to be better," she cried, looking up at me, her face a mess of tears and decades-old pain. "I thought if you were perfect, if you learned to submit, to be quiet, to be a good wife, Ronald wouldn't. I thought I was saving you. I thought I was teaching you how to survive." "You weren't saving me, Auntie," I said, my own tears falling. "You were building my cage, the same one he built for you. We sat in silence for a long time. Beverly stood by the door, a silent, unmoving guardian. Finally, Aunt Kathleen wiped her face. She looked old, fragile, and utterly defeated. "What are you going to do, Judith?" she asked, her voice a dead whisper. "I'm leaving him," I said. "I'm not going back. Rosemary is moving me to a safe place. I am not letting my daughter grow up in that house." I waited for her to protest, to tell me I was a fool, to threaten me. Instead, she just nodded slowly. "He'll never stop looking for you, you know. He's proud. He won't stand for the shame." "I know," I said. "But I need you to do one thing for me. I need you to lie for me. I need you to buy me time. Go home. Tell Ronald, tell Uncle Kenneth, that the doctors are keeping me for another week, that I have an infection. Tell them something believable. Can you do that? Can you do that one thing for me? And for my daughter?" Aunt Kathleen looked down at her hands. I could see the war inside her, a lifetime of submission fighting against this one, last, terrible truth. She stood up, her back still a little bent, but her eyes were clear for the first time. "He's a good liar," she said, her voice quiet. "But so am I. I've had 50 years of practice. I will tell them your infection is bad, that you can't have visitors. I will buy you 3 days. That's all I can promise." She walked to the door. She didn't look back. "Be safe, Judith," she whispered, and then she was gone. "You're a brave woman," Beverly said after she had left. "No," I said, closing my eyes, "but I'm finally learning to be." 2 days later, in the dead of night, Rosemary and Beverly wheeled me out a back service entrance of the hospital. I hadn't even said goodbye to my baby. Rosemary said it was too risky to go back to the neonatal unit. My heart ached with the physical separation. I got into Rosemary's car, a small, dark speck in the night, and left my old life behind. The shelter was an old, unmarked brick building. Inside, it was warm, clean, and filled with the quiet, humming energy of women. Women with bruises, women with haunted eyes, women who, like me, were starting over with nothing. I was given a small, simple room with a bed, a dresser, and a lock on the door. A lock. I hadn't had a door I could lock in my entire life. That first night, I turned the key and wept with relief. The next few weeks were a blur. I met with a lawyer, a sharp, kind woman named Gail. She was a volunteer for the shelter. I told her everything. She listened, her face grim, as I recounted the years with Aunt Kathleen and the nightmare with Ronald. "We have a strong case," she said, "especially with the medical report from the birth and Nurse Beverly's testimony. We will file for a divorce on grounds of cruelty, and we will petition for sole, permanent custody of your daughter. But Judith, it's going to be a war. He will not give her up easily." She was right. Ronald was served with the restraining order and the divorce papers. He exploded. He was barred from the hospital, from seeing me, from seeing the baby. He showed up at the shelter, screaming and demanding, but the police were called, and he was arrested for violating the order. He tried to turn everyone against me. He told my father I was mentally unstable, that I had been brainwashed by radical women at the hospital. My father, to my pain, but not my surprise, believed him. He sent me a letter begging me to come to my senses and return to my husband and be a proper wife. I tore it up. I lived in a state of suspended terror, waiting for the next legal move, for the next time he would try to find me. But I was also, for the first time, living. I took classes at the shelter. I learned how to type. I learned how to balance a checkbook. I worked in the shelter's kitchen, and in doing so, I rediscovered my love for cooking, not as a duty, but as a joy, a way to nurture the other women. 6 weeks after I had run, Rosemary came to the shelter. She was smiling. "She's ready, Judith. She's strong enough. She's coming home." That afternoon, they brought her to me, my daughter. I held her in my arms, a real warm, breathing 5-pound miracle. I had decided to name her Rosemary, after the woman who had saved us. Holding her in my small, safe room, I knew I had made the right choice. This was my new life. This was my family. A few months later, I had another visitor at the shelter. It was Aunt Kathleen. She looked thinner, but her eyes were clear. She had left Uncle Kenneth. "He found out," she said simply. "He found out I had helped you. He did what he always does." She touched a fading bruise on her temple. But this time, I didn't hide it. This time, I called the police. I am testifying against him. It had taken her nearly 50 years, but she had finally broken her own chain. "I don't have much," she said, pulling a worn envelope from her purse. "Kenneth controlled all the main accounts, but like you, I had my secrets." She handed me the envelope. It was thick with cash. "It's my grocery money, from 50 years. I want you and the baby to have it, to start over, a real start." I cried, and I accepted it. It was her penance, and it was my future. The legal battles were as brutal as Gail had predicted. Ronald fought, tooth and nail. He lied. He painted me as an unfit, hysterical mother. But we had the truth. We had Beverly's testimony. We had the hospital photos of my injuries. And then we had the most powerful weapon of all, Aunt Kathleen. She walked into that courtroom, frail but dignified, and she testified. She told the judge about her own life with Kenneth. She told them about her lost babies, and she told them, her voice shaking but clear, how she had collaborated in my abuse, how she had encouraged Ronald, how she had believed it was education. "I was wrong," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "I was a fool, and I let my own brokenness poison that girl's life. He is not a husband, he is a monster, just like mine." We won. I was granted a full divorce and sole, permanent custody of Rosemary. Ronald was given no visitation rights. He was a broken man. He lost his job. He lost his reputation. I heard years later that he had moved away, a bitter, lonely man who died alone. Uncle Kenneth was convicted. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for decades of spousal abuse. He died there. With the money from Aunt Kathleen, I got a small apartment. I found a job as a cook in a small, family-run diner. The owner, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, saw my passion. He taught me about the business. I saved every penny. Aunt Kathleen and I found a strange, quiet peace. She lived her remaining years in a small, clean nursing home. I would visit her, and I would bring Rosemary. She would hold her granddaughter's hand, her eyes full of a sad, quiet wonder. She had never been able to be a mother, but in the end, she learned to be a grandmother. She died peacefully in her sleep 5 years after Kenneth was sent to prison. She died a free woman. Years passed. Life went on. My Rosemary grew up strong and smart and, above all, free. She was never quiet. She was never small. She was loud and joyful and argued with me about everything. And I loved every minute of it. She grew up knowing her value, knowing that no man, no person, ever had the right to educate her with their hands. I eventually took over the diner from Mr. Henderson when he retired. I renamed it The Sunrise, because for me, that's what it was. A new day. I hired other women from the shelter, giving them their first jobs, their first taste of independence. Today, at 78, my life is quiet. My daughter, Rosemary, is now a doctor. A wonderful, compassionate doctor who works in a neonatal unit, saving babies just like the one she used to be. She is married to a good, kind man, a man who respects her, a man who is her true partner. I look at my life, at my small, peaceful apartment. I look at my daughter, and I know that the cycle is broken. The silence, the pain, the terrible education that was passed down like a curse, it ended with me. It ended in that hospital room, with a brave nurse and a few grainy photographs. Thank you for listening to me today, for allowing me to share with you this intimate chapter of my life. If my story has touched you, please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to discover other testimonies like mine. And please share it, because who knows? Maybe someone going through a similar trial right now will find the courage to keep searching, to hope, to believe in the impossible. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me.